Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. Here at Forbidden Knowledge News, I've always taken an unbiased, open-minded, and responsible approach to presenting my own theories, and the views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. Conspiracies are definitely fun to discuss in a responsible way. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Max Lebow. First, a couple of announcements. Watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. That's on Tubi, Roku channel, and multiple streaming platforms. Get a Rokfin premium membership, rokfin.com/FKN Plus. Get access to all our premium content and all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. And be sure to download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker. We are booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Max Lebow. He is host of the Final War podcast, which tells his personal story of global cyber warfare, espionage, disinformation, and surveillance. Max, welcome. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to learning more about your story, which exposes propaganda and disinformation in the film industry, as well as cyber warfare, espionage, and much more. It's very exciting just hearing about it, but what you've been through sounds like it actually comes out of a Hollywood film. So very much looking forward to learning more about this. But before we do, this is your first time on. Tell us just a little bit about yourself and your podcast.
Sure. Yeah, so it's funny that you say it sounds like a Hollywood movie, because that's been one of the biggest accusations I've gotten so far, is people think I've made this whole thing up, which if I did, like, incredible story to come up entirely out of thin air. But yeah, so, and it also does not help that I was an actor. People like to say, "Oh, he's an actor, he's lying." But you know,
especially
I'll let
in our
you decide for
conspiracy
yourself.
world these days, man.
Right. Well, if it helps, a very unsuccessful actor. The Illuminati has not tapped me for whatever.
Hasn't been confirmed.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, I was an actor for many years, mostly just like theater in New York and stuff, but I did some TV. Actually, right when this started, I was on Mr. Robot, which is a funny parallel in the story. There was a time when I thought this was some kind of weird like hazing initiation they were doing, because it started like right when I was on the show, not even when it came out, but when I worked on the show. So that's strange. And then, yeah, I kind of got fed up with that acting lifestyle, because like the ones who do get tapped, I'm not willing to do anything. But I got a great opportunity to go make documentary films with Brian Fogel, who's like this great documentary filmmaker. He makes kind of investigative, like espionage type of documentaries, like Icarus, about the Russians doping in the Olympics, and when Jamal Khashoggi, that Saudi journalist, got killed in the embassy in Turkey. And he's dealt with this kind of stuff head on. So it was actually very fortuitous that I was working for him, because I got to make some good connections that helped me tell my story better. But yeah, so I was making documentaries, and this hack was going on and off throughout the entire time of living in New York, being an actor, and in LA. And then yeah, once it boiled down, I just realized the most, I think, or the best medium, at least at this point, to tell it would be a podcast.
Well,
so,
it is a very fast-growing medium. It's very popular right now. I think it's a great way to reach people, and I'm looking forward to getting as much of your story out as possible within an hour and a half. So take us through from the beginning as much as you can, but take your time. I don't want you to really skip over anything important. So where should we start with this?
I think just day one, the first message I received, and also feel free, because there's a lot of things I'll say beg a lot of questions.
Trust
so
me,
feel free to jump in. Okay, cool. So yeah, literally first thing that happened was I just booked that role on Mr. Robot, and I was sitting on my couch, unemployed, and looking at Instagram, and I got a notification. It was a comment on a picture, and it read like a riddle, like a beautiful poem. It said, "Attention to you, Max Lebow. It is urgent to see that there is a pale, frail bird looking up at you from the perch. This is the new schism." Like, very strange, beautiful writing, but it also said, "Looking up at you from the perch on Havemeyer and South Fifth Streets," which is where I lived. And so, suspect. And I'm not like a tech guy, so I don't know what it takes to like dox someone, or how often people are just doing this kind of thing, randomly commenting people's addresses on. So I was horrified from the beginning, even though, the rational mind is like, this is probably a joke, a friend messing with me, something. So I tried to kind of go down that path, but I just couldn't imagine anyone in my life. And so, I know that a lot of people would probably ignore that kind of thing, but my mind would be lying awake at night wondering, is someone going to show up at my door? Like, what is the purpose of this? This has never happened to me. And as I kind of started exploring on Reddit and the shallow web, I guess, I could not find anything like this, especially as it unfolded. Because so I first thing I did was I messaged them. I just said, "Who are you?" Because it was clear to me that I had to figure this out. And eventually I went to the local police. They didn't do anything. I reported it to Instagram. They didn't do anything. So it was clear that I was on my own. And so I said, "Who are you?" They said, "G." I said, I've recorded on my podcast. We go through the scenes. I hired an actor and we play out the messages. So I've memorized a lot of them. And I said, "What do you want from me?" They said, "To comprehend." Comprehend what? And they're like essentially like the final, there's like, they're essentially saying there's this like shadowy final war going on. Like, it sounded like the Matrix, that's how it felt. I was like, my whole life up until this point has been a lie. Like, this is the beginning, you know what I mean? And, but I kept trying to come back to like the rational, let's just figure this out. But every time I tried to get a grip, they'd be like, "We see you sitting there on your green couch," or, "You're on the 7th floor," or, your GPS keeps altering. Like, why is that? And every time I would look at Google Maps in my old apartment, my location would jump around because there wasn't great cell service. And so it was very hard to stay rational, because it was very clear that they, were up my ass. But the strange thing was, they said, "We wish you no harm." Like, we're the good guys. I was like, "What do you mean the good guys? Like, what is going on here?" And it was day 2 of talking to them that they said that they were, and this is on the line of unverified. What's verified is the hack, because I mean, they ended up talking about, "You talked about this in therapy today. Tell us more about that." Or, "You had a conversation in the car with your dad 5 years ago about this specifically. What? Tell us more." Like, damn. Yeah, way before. So the hack, real. And unverified, let's say, is that they said they were dissidents of the Chinese military who were working on 5G, and upon discovering that it was this like evil tool for to conquer the soul of humanity or something, they broke away. What year was this again? Came to the U.S. This was oh yeah, good point. So this started March 6th of 2019, and actually, fun fact, one of the first messages they ever said to me, I think I again said, like, "What do you want from me?" And they said, "Absolution from the growing pandemic." And they said it in March of 2019. and I've written it off as like, okay, they're hackers. They're clearly using a translator. Maybe it's like, oh, a virus, pandemic,
Yeah.
and I try not to dig too deep into that,
Interesting.
but fun little Easter egg
Yeah.
there, yeah. Um, and so, yeah, they're like, we're these dissidents. And they were essentially like, we're fighting the good fight. Like, we're fighting back against this system of control that's meant to be like the final war for the mind and the soul of humanity. And so, on the one hand, I'm horrified and want nothing to do with this because they've clearly hacked the shit out of me and everything they're saying sounds insane. But then there's this other side of me that's like, got a creative mind and is curious and probably thinks I'm smarter than I am. And so I was like, I got this. I was like, I can take a few more steps. Um, and but they just had such a like whoever they are, they're the smartest person I've ever talked to. They had such a grasp on like my psychology, my history. They knew that I took certain medications in certain years, like just stalking, spying. Like they were like you wouldn't think it would be a regular guy. Like you'd think someone who's getting hacked to that extent is like, you know, Jeff Bezos or
Right, right,
something.
right.
So it was like it was hard to and when I would tell people about it, they'd be like, it's just hard to it doesn't fit into any like prescribed boxes that of like things that we know that happen, you know? Maybe if you're like if you're pretty far out there and you understand like MK Ultra and like that kind of world, but even that is horrifying to, you know. I was on a show the other day and someone was like, "You've kind of got like a John Wilkes Booth like profile," and I was like, "Oh my god." Um, uh, and it was right after Trump got shot
Oh,
too, and
geez.
and he was like maybe they were trying to get you to do it, and I was like, oh my god. So
Yeah, yeah.
narrowly avoided that. But so pretty much what they said was they were like, we came here from China, we don't speak English, we're not trusted in these circles and everything, and we can falsify documents, we can falsify certifications, and we need for you to be a communications expert, aka mole. So, and again, this is all happening on Instagram,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm sitting there like unemployed actor, like oh, for all intents and purposes, normal guy, and I'm just like, okay, this is crazy. And then I'm like, but it's so interesting. And I'm like, no, but it's crazy. And they're like, then they'll say something else, like, remember when you had a conversation with your mom about wanting to drop out of college like 5 years ago, like very like not literally, but kind of schizophrenic existence. That's also something people like to say is that I'm schizophrenic. But I have my therapist on the very first episode and throughout
Right
the
on.
show to validate that
That's
that's not
great.
the case. Not that there's anything wrong
Yeah.
with that, but you
Right
know.
on, right on.
That's kind of like the New York chapter is this very hands-off approach where they're just like, there's this new world that you don't know anything about, this shadowy war that's going on. We're here to initiate you slowly. We don't want anything from you. We're not going to hurt you. We're just here. And maybe if you pass some tests, you can like meet with someone. And so I thought at the time it was as bad as it was going to get in terms of like losing my mind. My relationship fell apart really because of this, because it's like, she was like, so someone's watching us? Like, I don't feel safe in our home anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
um, and I was like, fine, okay, I'll meet with this like person in public, whatever. Um, and they're like, okay, we're going to test you first. So then I get a message from someone claiming to be a student who received an email from me saying I work with the Chinese government and we're hacking this random student, and that they need, and pretty soon after I get this message, I'm like, okay, this is the test. Because they came to me with all the things that I had told the hacker were my greatest fears. I was like, you're actually PLA, you're not dissidents, like, and you're gonna try to get me to do something crazy. You're just a scammer trying to steal money from me. Like, and this student came at me with all these things that I had said. So I was like, okay, this is them testing me. And And at that point I got furious at them, and I was just like, fuck off. Like, I don't want anything to do with any of this. I know you're the same person. They're like, okay, peace. And like 6 months go by, I get this job to go make documentaries in LA. And actually, in the meantime, they create a fake Instagram account in my name and had conversations with ex-girlfriends of mine.
No shit.
Specifically ex-girlfriends. Yeah, like, and I have those screenshots, and we recreate those scenes on my show. Where they're like, it's so funny reading them too, because they're like, I have recently bought a motorcycle and undertaken studies in 5G technology.
Jesus.
And like, and the girls are like, cool, like, what's that? You know, like, bless them, because I got fooled by the hacker too, but
Yeah.
wild. And so yeah, like 6 months go by, and my life is, there's also kind of this through line of like purpose. Like, I was unemployed. You know, like, I was kind of unsatisfied in my life, and then this thing came along that was like, you're special, you know, like, there's a war here, and like, you can help. And it kind of like activated this like purpose in me that maybe like for previous generations, like war has,
Right
you
on,
know,
yeah.
where you're like, oh, I like have a purpose, you know, like, there's something I can do besides just scroll my life away on Instagram. But then, so yeah, I got this job. It was a great job making documentaries in LA with this great filmmaker. And for a while I was like very satisfied. I didn't need anything else. Like, it was a great life. And then COVID hit. I think I got there October of 2019. I had a few months before, you know, the whispers of COVID, and then it hit, and all Hollywood dried up. Everything was, there was no work to be done. And I was, because my boss was friends with this humanitarian Hollywood type guy who had this big COVID testing company in LA. We got offered to like help do comms, and this was in the beginning before anybody knew what was going on. I was like, because I'm kind of like a skeptic with most things, so in the beginning when no one was worried, I was really worried. But then when everyone was worried, I was like, but at this point I was like, oh, this is real shit, let's go. So we started helping this company. But 2 days after 6 months, 2 days before I get offered this job at this big COVID testing company, the hacker came back, and they were like, hey, we're back. Watch how the river bends. Like, just wait. Something is going to change, and we're back. Like 2 days after 6 months, 2 days before. And then when I get the job, they're like, yeah, of course we knew. They said, like, we were always working to like something like bend the river in your favor. And I was like, what the fuck does that? I was like, are they hacking these guys? Are they like, what? And it was also a time when all of us were like, okay, the world is not what it's like. When COVID hit, we were all like, the world is not what we thought it was to a greater extent. Yeah, we were all turned upside down. And then add this on top. So I was more willing and more vulnerable, I think, at that point, to go along with them.
Were there any other strange circumstances around your hiring? Did any other red flags along the way?
With the documentary job or the
Either
COVID job, or I mean, it's one of those things where, and I get why people think it's made up, honestly, and thank God I have the screenshots, everything saved, and I have corroboration from people involved, including my therapist. But a lot of it does seem like too perfect, right? Because like, I go work for this documentary filmmaker who works at the highest level in like investigative journalism and espionage and spying and hacking, and then this is happening, you know. And then we work at this COVID company, and like the hackers want to know all about what's going on at the COVID company and the COVID testing sites. So like, yeah, red flags, but nothing that I could be like, oh, that is like the through line. It's just like, it seems like too good to be true. But then every time you're like, oh, maybe that's the thing that I can kind of latch onto as the solution, you're like, wait, but this other thing contradicts it. You're like, oh, of course these hackers wanted to, you know, get to me so they could get to Brian, the filmmaker I was working for, and they could get to this other humanitarian Hollywood guy and all their connections. But the hack started like a year before I even really like knew who this guy was.
Right.
You know, I was just like, I had no connection to him before. And they do get into some some trippy stuff later on. Like, did you watch Westworld?
No, I actually have not seen that one.
It's pretty good. I think it's like first season good, second season, third season I thought was great. And the premise is that they create this like AI to predict the stock market, and it becomes so omnipotent that it's able to predict like every action that every person will take, including up to like the moment and the cause of their death. And they learn that like humanity always heads towards destruction, and so they have to like harness this tool to like control people or whatever. And some stuff comes out later in the story where they make some pretty wild claims about AI and about like Neuralink type technology and predictive, all this kind of stuff, where it's like, if you want to go off the deep end with this in terms of, like you said, the red flags or the coincidences or whatever, you can. But I try to keep it as objective as possible.
Yeah, well, I got a question after you tell the entire thing that might dive us way down the rabbit hole, but we'll see how this goes.
Let's go. I mean, yeah. So I'm working at this COVID site. They want to know more about what's going on there. And by the way, the first thing they sent me, one of the first messages when I got to LA after this hiatus, was a link to a Department of Justice article about this guy named Dr. Charles Lieber, who was before he was arrested. You know about him? Because what's interesting, that's dope, because what's interesting is a lot of people, even people who like, know about kind of the sketchy underbelly of the world, are like, who's that?
For those that aren't familiar,
but
go ahead and tell us a little bit about who he is.
Okay, yeah. So he was, before he was arrested for working with the Chinese government, or lying to the Department of Justice about working with the Chinese government, he was the world's like leading nanobiologist. And you can find his work, everything I'm about to say, I'm not an expert in anything, but everything I'm about to say, you can find on the MIT website, the Harvard website. It's all there. He was the world's leading nanobiologist, and he developed injectable nanotechnology that embeds itself in your nervous system and can monitor and manipulate your nervous system. And on the front-facing version of that is it can help people with Alzheimer's, or someone who's paralyzed maybe, or some stuff like that. But he also had contracts with the Department of Defense and the Chinese government, who had been paying him millions of dollars to work in a lab in Wuhan. Yeah. And he was arrested in December of 2019, fleeing the country with the technology that he had. And two of his students, who turned out to be Chinese agents, were arrested fleeing, I think, from San Francisco, also with this technology that he had. Yeah. So that's one of those things where you're like, okay, that is the objective assessment. But when you zoom out a little bit and you just try to, all you have to do is like, connect like one little dot to be like, all of those things, including the timing, it's very strange, to say the least. And so the hackers were like, oh, those were our compatriots, the guys that were, working with Lieber secretly, were Chinese agents. And so yeah, they claimed that they're like, this is the real beginning of the final war. Like COVID, all of this marks like, this is it. And so at this point, honestly, it's a little embarrassing, but I think good art is a little vulnerable, so I try to go there. Like I was like totally gung ho at this point. I mean, there was still this fear of like, they haven't really like proven that they are who they say they are, but with the state of the world, them showing me their power as hackers, like all of these things, I was like, something is going on here. Like, I don't know if they're really dissidents of the Chinese military, but something is happening here that's interesting, and also like was comforting at the time, because everyone was running around like chickens with their heads cut off. But I had this like thing in my back pocket. I had this like, they were telling me in March of 2020, like, oh, this is how it's all going to unfold over the next year. This is what you need to do. These are the things you need to be prepared for. And they were right. They called like so many shots about which countries would do what, the economy, like all this stuff. And so I kind of felt like empowered. Like I was going to these COVID testing sites, and what they would tell me is like, take out your phone and have certain conversations with like administrators or nurses or people who are getting tested. And at that point, so this is where the kind of double life began, because I very much was like certain something was going on here and that like this was interesting and there was some juice here, but I was also like, I don't want to commit treason. Like I might be foolish.
That's what I was just thinking.
But I'm not foolish enough, to like become a patsy. Because the whole time they're like, no, man, like you're Siddhartha, like you're the lion, like buffing my ego. I was like, that's cool, thank you. But I still have no way possibly of trusting that I'm not just going to become like collateral, in whatever the fuck this is. And so I would like have a certain conversation around my phone and then like put my phone away when I knew it got like too intimate or too revealing about what we were talking about, because we're standing in circles with like high profile filmmakers, humanitarians, like in LA, like having very enlightening conversations about like very particular details of how LA, how the country, how the world is handling COVID, and that could be valuable information to some like foreign power, So it got to the point where they were like, there's this tech billionaire, Chamath Palihapitiya, who was like, and I'm not saying any of this is true, I'm not trying to slander him, but they said this guy who was one of the founding members of you know who he is?
No, I don't.
He's kind of he seems like a cool guy. He was one of the founding members of Facebook, but now he's like very publicly remorseful about like the effect that social media has had on our culture. And his whole perspective is like, there are people who get to push their worldview onto the world because they have all the capital. And so he's like, I'm going to get the capital. He's like a billionaire. He's like, I'm going to get the capital and I'm going to push my worldview. And he's very critical of like, corporations and all this kind of stuff. And he sounds like he's got a good message. And he's even talked about the Rothschilds on like, I don't want to say the wrong news. I think it was like CNN or something. He like brought up or some major news network. And you don't ever hear anyone talking about the Rothschilds on the news. You know what I mean? And so he seems like a cool dude. So I was watching his interviews and I was like, yeah, maybe this guy does work with them. And that kind of the boiling point of it all was they were like, okay, this guy works with us and he's going to brief you. He's going to give you a encrypted phone, a black book, like all this. And like, you're going to really, this has all been onboarding, all of this previous stuff. And now it's about to really begin. And they said he was coming to get me July 4th of 2020. But in the meantime, this was like maybe a few weeks away. They were like, some weird things started to happen. So I had this crazy dream, like, what's it called? Sleep paralysis type dream, where someone injected me with something and I like died in the dream. Or I like, as I died, I like woke up and I was sweating and my heart was, and so it kind of made me like fearful, certainly, and like skeptical of them because I was just in a heightened state. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they were like, oh, your dreams are getting hacked. And I was like, whoa. I was like, a lot of things that they did and said, like, I wasn't like, okay, yes, I believe you 100%, but I was like, I don't want to be fucking hearing this shit right now. You know what I mean? Like, we were already, all of us, on the brink during COVID, and then this, and I was just like, I started to get really skeptical of them and really just like, okay, there's too much crazy shit going on here with nothing really tangible. And then they started talking about thought hacking and like, and they really went off the deep end of just like, I'm not saying it's impossible. There was just an article that came out about 2 people being able to communicate in REM sleep for like the first time. Like I'm not foolish enough to think that there are certain technologies that we're not aware of, or the government's testing, or they've been available on the black budget for 10 years before. Like, so for example, the thing I hinted at before, they said that they were androids. They kept saying like, you humans and like human beings. And I was like, don't you mean us? And they were like, well, we are in possession of technology that's kind of like Neuralink, and it's been around for 10 years already. And it's essentially like having Siri in our minds, because the one of the strangest things about talking to them, which a friend of mine pointed out, he was like, how long are they taking to send messages? Is it a day? Is it a few hours? I was like, immediately. Like almost in the way that when you ask ChatGPT a question, it just starts typing. Yeah. Like they were, and not only just one word answers, like paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. I'd be like, who's they? Who are the bad guys? And they would send me pages and pages and pages about, okay, it started with Genghis Khan and the Black Death in the what, 15th, 16th, I don't know. And that led to the downfall of the monarchies in World War One in Europe, which then led to this consolidating of power around the financial sector that then rebuilt, and then it came to America, the Marshall, all this stuff, and like I said, whoever they are, they're the smartest person I've ever talked to. There was some days went by where we just talked and talked and talked like that, and electromagnetism and like all this crazy shit. And so then when they explained that, I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Not that I'm fully buying it, but yeah, they were like, we have Siri in our brains. It's military technology that's been available, and now it's being introduced slowly to the public through Elon Musk or whatever. But yeah, that's what we are. And I know, right? Like,
well,
it's so insane.
You're on the right show, bro, because I'm going to ask you some questions. You would be surprised at the connections that to your story to many others that I've interviewed. There's too many of these people that are experiencing things like this for it to be just some kind of fluke.
Well, I wonder, the ending is maybe a little disappointing. I think very interesting, but not necessarily.
We'll see how it compares to other things that I've heard.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because there are a lot of people that have messaged me, like, all love and respect to them, but there hasn't been a lot of like proof. Because I know about like targeted individuals, I know about all that, and that's a fucked up experience to have for sure. And a lot of people have compared, but the one difference is that like I have these messages saved with the metadata of like this happened, right. You know. And I'm not saying the targeted individual stuff doesn't happen, but there's a difference. And so I'm curious about your story. So I'll finish up. Pretty much I was dating this girl at the time, and I wasn't telling anyone. I was miserable. I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep. I thought people were hacking my thoughts and my dreams, and with no tangible effect. And July 4th came and went. And I was like, where the fuck is this guy? Like, if this guy doesn't come get me, like, we're done. Like, this is bullshit, you know? And they're like, he just needs a little more time. So I was like, this is fucking bullshit, man. They're just leading me on, you know? And this is just some troll. But then I'm like, but why would they be talking to me for 2 years, getting nothing out of me just to watch me squirm, you know? But then it wasn't adding up. And so pretty much I told them to fuck off, and they did. They said, we'll shake hands on the battlefield and see that we are all who we say we are, right? So they left me with this like haunting threat. And so and they had left and come back before. So I was like, that's a promise, you know? So when I was like, okay, and the whole time I'd been writing a screenplay about it, because that's how I process things. Like when something fucked up happens to me, I just start writing about it. And so I've been writing this story, and I was talking to a friend about it, and we were reading the messages, and then we were having conversations, and we were like, oh, this is like a good format for a podcast. So we started making a podcast, and someone that I worked with was like, you need someone in law enforcement to be able to like corroborate this story or to comment on it based on their experience. And so I cold called the FBI, like 1-800-FBI, which is funny because I spent like most of my life being like, you know, fuck the system, and like, I don't trust anybody. And I still don't, but the idea that I would ever reach out to the FBI willingly was laughable. But my thought was, okay, these guys are clearly still watching me, the hackers. And if I have like one move to make, it's that if I call the FBI, it'll help with my podcast, one, and two, the hackers have to see that and know that like now the juice is no longer worth the squeeze with me, you know? To keep watching me if the FBI is also watching me is like too risky. There's no point. So I called them. This was Thanksgiving of 2020, and some lady on the phone said, okay, I told her my whole story. She said, someone will call you in the new year or never. 2 days later, they're at my house. 2 guys in suits, front door, little bungalow in Venice, California, knocking on the gate. Very out of place, these guys. And and they came in, and I was like, for the period of time that I fancied myself like a secret agent, I was like, no, I am not that guy. I was like shaking in my boots. I told them
What did they
everything. I
look
was
like?
like,
Were you able to describe?
well, yeah, yeah, sure. So, two guys in suits. One was like very clearly the good cop, and one was very clearly the bad cop. The good cop was like a little shorter. He had scruffy hair. He was using like slang terms that were clearly meant to like endear himself to me. You know what I mean? And if they had showed up without me calling the FBI, then I would have been like, who the fuck are you? But because I had called the FBI and they showed up 2 days later, and I later filed Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, so I'm pretty sure they were
Yeah, okay.
vets. And then the other guy was like the bad cop. He was big, he was huge, and he was scary, and he barely spoke. And looking at him in the eye sent a fucking shiver down my spine. Like, I don't necessarily believe in lizard people, but if I ever have met one, it was this fucking guy. There was like a fog came over the room when this guy walked in. It was super
Yeah.
spooky. Um, and so they chatted for a bit, and then I was like, just look at the messages, and I was like, are you guys recording this? And they're like, no. Are you? And I was like, no, which is relevant later. So they read all the messages. I was like, guys, am I going to jail? Like, that's all I want to know. And they're like, let's just say it's a good thing you brought this to us and not the other way around.
Yeah.
Implying that that might not be the case if they came to me. So, and I was like, okay, so like, what is this? What do you think this is? And they're like, we don't think they're dissidents. We think this is actually the Chinese military. And they're like, but we need like a couple weeks. So they gave me a name and a number written on a piece of paper. They were like, call us if anything happens, and we'll call you in 2 weeks. And actually, as they were walking out too, I said, I kind of got my confidence back a little bit, and I made a joke. I was like, so you guys are like watching me now, right? And they're like, there was a silence. I looked to the bad cop, and he just looked at me with the creepiest like grin, dead eye, it again, it sent a shiver down my spine. And then the good cop was like, broke the silence, and he was like, no, of course not. You're an American citizen. We can't watch you. You have rights. And I was like, that's not very comforting. Um, and so 2 weeks go by. I think I called them once or twice, being like, "You promise I'm not going to jail?" And they're like it's just so funny going from I'm like I'm 007 to being like I'm just a guy that doesn't want to go to
Yeah.
jail. Calls me 2 weeks later. He says, the good news is you don't ever have to worry about these fuckers ever messing with you again. And the bad news is we can't tell you anything about it. So I asked him a few questions. Is it a state actor? Blah, blah, blah. Every answer was, I can't say anything. But then I asked him, I said, if this was a state actor, and would you tell me the truth about what happened in exchange for using my podcast as propaganda? Like, that's how far to the other end of the spectrum I went. I went from like fighting for the final war against the man to being like, I will do anything if you just tell me what actually happened. And what's interesting is he didn't say yes, but what's interesting is that he said he actually answered this question. He said, I suggested that to my superior, but he said we can't make any public statements, and that would, I guess, telling me what happened would be a public statement. So I was like, wait, did he just inadvertently kind of verify that it was a state actor by suggesting the thing that I said? So, but if I've learned anything, it's that you can't fucking trust anyone in these circles.
Yes,
So it could have been another manipulation of him to answer that question or something. But so he was like, file a Freedom of Information Act. I filed a Freedom of Information Act. It came back 6 weeks later, which is very fast, fully redacted, except for my statement, which was almost everything I said during our first meeting at my house verbatim, and quoting the messages verbatim.
Yeah.
I didn't give them my phone. I didn't give them my computer, and they said they weren't recording me. So I was like, okay, somebody's lying here. They were recording me, or they hacked me after the fact to get to all the so I'm like, oh, I can't trust these guys either. And it was fully redacted. I tried to appeal it. I got someone from the media, like a big publication, to file their own thing. And they claimed that they didn't send the right paperwork, and it was this weird runaround. And then they sent them a CD in the mail, with another fully redacted FOIPA. But what's weird about the FOIPA is, so it's all redacted and there's all these clauses, and I go through it on the last episode of my podcast. It's about to come out, I think tonight or tomorrow. And it's all very bureaucratic and everything. But the strangest thing is that at the bottom it says there's no proof that Max Lebow, Mr. Lebow, whatever, was compromised digitally. And so you could look at that skeptically and say like, oh, okay, so there's something else that was going on here and you made this up or whatever. But I was like, bro, they were quoting things that was said to me in therapy the same day, and conversations I had 5 years ago. They talked about a video I had in my phone. So like maybe it wasn't my phone, maybe it was my iCloud, maybe it was who the fuck knows what. But the FOIPA professional who works for that news publication that helped me out was like, this is the strangest case of a FOIPA I've ever seen in my life. Nobody gets a response in 6 weeks, let alone a fully redacted one. If you're going back fast, it's usually because there's nothing in it. So it was almost as though they were just like, fuck off. Like, take this and fuck off. We're not telling you anything. And I later ended up talking to, through my work, I knew a guy who used to have like the highest clearance at the NSA, and this other guy who worked the head of IT security at a branch of the government. And they both were like, oh yeah, this happens. What's funny is that like mid-level tech experts are like, no way. But the high-level tech experts are like, oh yeah, this happens. We just like really keep it on the DL. And the purpose is either to undermine our sense of truth, like, because let's say some of the things they said to me were true and some of them were false. Suddenly, I'm now spouting all this information on my podcast and my Instagram, and people might cling on to it and think they know, and also because later when I started working for Brian, they had a direct line. I was pitching Brian on a project that would involve Charles Lieber. And so now these hackers have a direct line to like the highest levels of Hollywood documentary. Yes. And so they're like, this happens. It happened to a guy who was in the Fugees. It happened to Kathy Hochul, I don't know her last name, the governor of New York. Her assistant turned out she was a Chinese spy. And it's not all dependent on China. I think all countries are doing this. This story is just about the Chinese government. But so I mean, people like to say, oh, it was actually the Chinese government. Some people are like, oh, it was an AI program gone rogue. Some people are like, oh, it's a new MK Ultra type thing. Some people were like, oh, they were trying to get you to be the fucking, like, try to shoot the president, or, like, all these horrifying theories, but not one, frankly, that I've been able to say, like, you know what, that one sounds 100% like the truth.
Well, let's explore some possibilities here based on some of the guests that I've had that has similar stories. The most obvious and probable that I would think would be the Chinese military trying to spread propaganda and misinformation through somebody that they butter up and build up to think that they're something special. And they are probably using something similar to ChatGPT to feed you the information. If you're saying it's coming through right away, that's, where I obviously would go to. But there's some strange other things, like the level of surveillance that they had on you and conversations that you had with your dad years ago, things like this. It's very questionable, as if there's deeper layers to this possibly. Some of the other people who have gone through this have maybe some similarities in their own lives and stories, starting with, this is going to be a weird one. Were you part of the Gifted and Talented program growing up?
I don't think so. I was sent to a therapeutic boarding school for bad kids with good test scores. So something like that, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Second one, close family members, people that are close to your family that are high-level military or intelligence.
Well, on my mom's side, my family has been in the Navy since 1622 in the U.S. My mom is not, and she only has one sibling who is now retired but I don't think intelligence. They were fighter pilots. So
now,
I don't know.
A lot of the people that have had similar stories, some of them are pretty believable in a sense that this could happen in reality, and some of them go off the deep end, outer space battles with aliens, MK Ultra, like you were saying. But I think there may be some kind of connection between a lot of these things because of the level of psychological warfare that we're immersed in. And like you mentioned, they probably have technology that we're not aware of that's probably ahead of what we have access to. And there has been a huge infiltration into the quote-unquote truther community, the conspiracy realms. Why wouldn't they be using advanced chat GPT type technologies, AI technologies, to come up with these fantastic narratives and stories that pull from real information that's out there somewhere and use it to get people to think certain things, do certain things. And when you said the dream hacking thing, you wouldn't believe how many people claim to have had this happen to them. Some of them believe that they have been either drugged or programmed somehow to believe that they are going off planet or having these out-of-body experiences. And some go as far as to believe that they're programmed assassins, that they have these altered personalities based on a lifetime of interaction by these secret clandestine groups. But it doesn't sound like before this you had any of that. But I'm wondering if there is some aspects to this that may be true that play along or play into what we're experiencing now with the psychological warfare and everything that we've just experienced with COVID, the turmoil, the online propaganda from all sides. Could it be that they are using people to carry out these clandestine missions, but they are just regular people that they are surveying somehow?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you were saying that, I get this like horrifying shiver up my spine, in the same way that I did when I first got the message of just like, oh my God, what if it's all been a lie? But thanks to this experience, actually, I've been able to kind of just roll with that feeling. And if any of that is true, there's not much I can do about it right now. You know, here we are having this conversation. There's nothing that can be done. So that helps me calm down. But to the point that I was on that other show and the guy was like, oh, you're kind of like a Lee Harvey Oswald. To that point, there are some highlighters, I guess, in my profile that are relevant. So I studied theater in Russia for 3 months in college. Let's just say you're looking at me from the outside, right? I lived in Russia for 3 months. I've also happened to have been to Cuba because of like a college course that I did. At that point, I had been sober. I got sober, and it was like 10 months of sobriety. And so that's a vulnerable time in one's life. And also I had, done a fair amount of drugs. And so my mind was scattered at the time, a little bit less so maybe when this started, because it had been like 10 months. Also the town that I'm from is a strange place. It's the headquarters of BlackRock.
Oh, really?
And that's one fun thing I like to see in the comments. People say I'm a BlackRock plant. Love that one. It's funny too because I said this on my show recently. I went from being someone who would like watch a podcast like this and be like, that guy, look in the background, checkerboard, or like, oh, like he just threw up this sign. Like I know what's going on here.
Yeah.
To being the person who people are saying that about, and I'm like, oh, nobody has any fucking idea what's going on. People are just making shit up because they're scared. And I think there's a lot more disorder and chaos than we want to believe. But yeah, the town I grew up in, very strange place. I was sent to this like weird boarding school in the woods in Virginia when I was like 16, and I remember it all. It's not like it's blacked out of my memory, and there was some like weird, psychological thing that went on there. But it was a strange place. Actually, the conversation I had in the car with my dad was about Harvey Weinstein because he lived in the town over from us, and we were driving by his house. And my dad was like, that's Harvey Weinstein's house. Like, nice house, maybe I should have gotten into film or something. He said something like that. And the hackers heard that while they were like watching Weinstein, I guess, is what they said. I don't know if it's true or not. And they heard us talking about him by his house, and this is back before everything came out. And that's how they first like attached to my dad, attached to me, found his name on my lease or something. Um, and yeah, so there are like some, also an actor. I think that's like a big thing. And also, I the role that I booked on Mr. Robot was someone who's doing a bunch of coke and talking about the flat Earth. And apparently they had a hard time booking that role for like 5 months or something, and then I come along and I kill it. And so it's like, okay, maybe that's because I'm kind of a kook. So so there are some things, but as far as I know, there is not some blacked out spot in my childhood where I was, drugged and manipulated, thankfully.
With all propaganda, there's levels of truth thrown in there, mixed with a bunch of bullshit. And we're seeing heavy infiltration and just bad information propped up by algorithms in general right now when it comes to the quote-unquote truth community. And I'm sure it's all intentional so that nobody really knows what the hell is going on, but some have speculated that the final war, maybe World War III, has already been playing out technologically through propaganda and these different clandestine operations that could be using people that have been programmed in some ways. I mean, you said yourself you were all gung-ho for a little while. How easy would it be for people that don't have the awareness of yourself, who are just going to blindly jump into something like that because their life is so horrible? This could be going on a much larger scale than people think, and that's what kind of concerns me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it makes me think of that guy that tried to shoot Trump recently.
Yes.
Like, how did he? And then and this is all second, third-hand information. I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe you do, but apparently, like his whole house was scrubbed, like professionally scrubbed. They they didn't do an autopsy or something. Like it was all a lot of suspicious things. And I was like, okay, well I was like, how do you? It's so easy. It's such a typical thing for people to just once the label of crazy is on something, it becomes like there's no need to think about it or talk about it or like, you know what I mean? So they just say, oh, he was crazy. And obviously to do something like that, you have to be pretty like unwell or whatever. But how does that happen? It makes me wonder about, it's like, was something like this happening to him and he just happened to have the right mental circumstances that allowed him to like take that extra step into that world? And you know what I mean? Because the hackers also were very anti-Trump, which was funny because they a lot of the stuff they said sounded like QAnon type stuff, but then they literally were like, read Nostradamus's quatrains in reference to the third Antichrist, Mabus, and that is Trump, and he is like going to be the precipice of like this final, the tinderbox of the final war, and they fucking hated him. And so when I was thinking about this guy that tried to, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, is that where this was like headed? Is this some like MK Ultra, because that's as far out as it gets, as far as I'm concerned, is MK Ultra, and it's real.
Yeah.
They said they shut it down. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are ways with the level of technology, the amount of young people that are on prescription drugs, and like you said, there's so many strange coincidences, weird aspects to some of these assassinations and high-impact events, and school shootings. Even if you look back at serial killers from the past, many of them have military connections. It's speculated that they may have been programmed to kill in some way. So this is all very strange. The more people become aware, it's like there's a reaction from those that don't want us to be aware, so they throw out everything, especially now that we have the internet. It's so easy to get bad information out there. They're straight up deleting things from the internet and changing it. So it's a really difficult time to get good information right now. But have you had anything else happen since the FBI incident?
Well, I mean, I've been making the show, and I would say the strangest thing that's happened is that everybody, like, the way I put it was everybody was something to lose that I've been in touch with, be it a military person, intelligence, whatever, someone in the media. Um, there was someone at the LA Times. There was someone at Wired. There was someone at Bloomberg. There was someone at all of these, and and also these intelligence agency people that I talked to. Every single one of them, when we sit down, I tell them the story and I show them the screenshots and all the messages and everything. They're like so interested. Someone at the Hollywood Reporter, they're so like everyone. Oh, actually, when I was pitching this story too, because I wanted to like make it through like a big podcast company, because they pay you, as opposed to me paying for everything. Um, I signed two separate deals, both like great deals, and they both fell through. And it's the same thing with all of these podcast companies, the media, intelligence, military, everybody I talk to. They love the story. They want to hear more. They think it's so interesting. It's like this great original thing that hasn't really been in the mainstream media. Like, wow. And there's evidence. What an incredible story. And then they go up the flagpole, poof, they disappear like one by one, like every single person. I gave a hard drive of all the messages I had with the hacker to someone at the LA Times, long interview with the Hollywood Report. Like all of these people, they're like, wow, I'd love to write this story. Like, let me just go back to my like editors. And all the editors are like, nope. And it could be as simple as like we talk about vaccine stuff and COVID stuff,
Yeah.
and they're too cowardly to put that stuff in their publications, in any kind of like free way as opposed to controlled. Um, but that's been the strangest thing is that, and I've had to bootstrap this whole fucking thing. And it's funny too. People say, oh, this his podcast was produced by Evergreen Creative and Circleback Entertainment Group. Like these weird, what are they about? I literally created Evergreen Creative like 3 weeks ago. And Circle Back is the guy who edits the podcast, and his like he makes comedy
Mm.
podcasts and stuff. But so yeah, we had to really put this whole thing together because it's been, despite the fact that it's an original story that people want to hear, and it's like it's been such an uphill battle because it seems like there's suppression around stuff like
Yeah, it
this.
makes you wonder how much information out there that's being presented from a whistleblower or confidential source that is just propaganda or bullshit. And conspiracies are huge right now, especially since the events of 2020, and people are questioning
Mhm.
everything and they've gone wild. But there's so much bullshit out there, it's so difficult to sift through. There's a couple of other things that people with
Please.
Go ahead.
No, no, yeah, go. I'm
Yeah, there's a
curious.
couple other things that on the list that people have experienced similar things. Have you ever had any paranormal or like UFO type experiences?
Yeah, nothing like abduction or anything like that. But before the therapeutic boarding school, I was in a therapeutic wilderness program, which some people, when I bring that up, they've heard of someone who like, I was in high school and I had this one friend who just like
Oh
disappeared.
shit!
You get like taken out into the middle of the woods. It's supposed to be like an intervention, whatever, but and we saw a lot of UFOs when we were out there. And then actually I was in New York when I was in rehab when I actually got sober, and I was walking back to the dorm or whatever, and in Brooklyn, and I just like looked over the city, and there was just like bright green light. Like it wasn't blinking, it wasn't moving, it was just a bright green light. And I just looked at it, and I did a double take, and the second time I looked back, I still saw it, and then it just disappeared. And then I just like went inside. So I'm not closed off to really anything. Everything is possible, I think. But yeah, I haven't been like abducted or anything like that.
Right on. Now, many of the people also claim that there are individuals or an individual in their lives that becomes very close with them, sort of like a handler that helps them, steers them in a certain direction, maybe gets them certain opportunities. Would you say there was anyone in your life similar to that?
Um, Another thing people like to say is that my therapist was in on it, and it was him. So they're like, that's how they know what you were saying in therapy. And I find that hard to believe. I guess it's possible, but I've known him for 7 years, on and off. We've talked, and he never really like pushes me to do or not do anything. He's a good therapist. He's just kind of like, so I would be shocked, but maybe he would. Laugh.
Honestly, it seems like they probably found you through your work with Mr. Robot and thought that you, for whatever reason, would be receptive to the praise and the information.
Yeah,
and
actor. It's fair.
Yeah, so that being the most likely explanation, but it's super fun to explore all of this, and that is a crazy story. So what's next for you? Going to continue with the podcast? Got any other plans for this?
Yeah, so the last episode of the first season is coming out, I think, tonight or tomorrow. I've just been going on, other shows, but again, it's been an uphill. I was on this other show, Danny Jones, and it got totally shadow banned. Like all of his videos get like hundreds of thousands of views, and you couldn't find it. You searched on his page, on YouTube, on his page, you could not find it anywhere. He did a poll, and like 75% of his people that took it couldn't find it. So, but you know what? Honestly, like I have to kind of get spiritual with it and be like, you know what? I'm telling this story. I put everything into it. I put money into it. I lived it. I made it. I wrote it. I fucking everything. And so I'm hoping that by coming on shows like yours and just like the right shows with the right audiences, that people who care about this stuff and are willing to have an open mind are going to listen to it. And there's already kind of like a little diehard audience of like, this episode that's coming out tonight or tomorrow is late, and they're like, where's the episode? So it's nice just to know that even like one or two people are interested. And then hopefully, I mean, maybe you've got something. I'd love to make a second season. We put an email at the end of every episode because I'm like, if this has happened to you, something like this, and you have proof, tell me. I would love to tell your story. And I'd love to do more and more seasons. The unfortunate part is that a lot of people have had experiences, whatever, that's similar to this, however you want to put that, but they don't have like the proof, and that's nothing bad against them, but in order to tell a story like this and have some people maybe believe you.
Yeah, that's a really good job. We really appreciate you having the proof to back that up. Yeah. And like you said, if anyone has had similar experiences, please reach out. Before we close out today, let everyone know how to find the podcast, how to find out more about you.
Yeah. So it's called The Final War. It's on Spotify, Apple, everywhere you can find it. We have an Instagram, The Final War Pod. Check it out and let us know if this has happened to you. I'm sorry, and we would love to help.
Right on. Max, thank you so much. This was great. I'd love to get some updates in the future. Maybe they might contact you again. Who knows?
Part of me wants them to, part of me doesn't, but I will let you know for sure.
Right on. Well, thank you again, Max. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history.